One afternoon, I was taking care of some children of a friend along with my children, and we went to the park, and when it was time to leave, one of their children threw a fit of anger. He didn't want to go. The progressive parenting experts would say that I should get down on his level, I should acknowledge his anger, I should coddle him in that, and that I should tell him that he's angry and I understand and that's okay. But are all emotions okay and acceptable? Is that the right approach, and will that help him learn to regulate his emotions in the future? I'll tell you what happened in a minute. In this short video, I'm going to explain to you why all emotions are not appropriate and how you can get your children to learn that they need to regulate their own emotions. The progressive parenting world has moved more and more toward the idea that all emotions are acceptable and okay, and that they should be coddled and they should be appeased. This is not true. All people have emotions, and that's normal, and that is okay. But people also have disordered emotions at times. So what makes the difference between an appropriate emotion that is in order and appropriate for the circumstances and one that is disordered and not appropriate for the circumstances? The difference is attitude. Some emotions are not appropriate, and certainly not all expressions of emotion are acceptable. We need to teach our children that sometimes we do have emotions that are disordered, and that when we have those emotions, we need to be able to recognize that, and we need to adjust ourselves, or in other words, adjust our attitude. Let me explain what I mean. When a child is angry because they have to leave the park, that is an emotion that is disordered. It would be acceptable for them to feel disappointed. That would be fine. Everyone's disappointed when they have to stop doing something that they enjoy. But anger is an emotion that's inappropriate for the circumstances. Anger might be understandable if somebody did something to them, or did something to their friend, or knocked over their block tower or something like that. Anger would be kind of appropriate at that moment, maybe not the expressions of anger or hitting or doing something wrong because you're angry, but it would be ordered and reasonable to be angry when somebody does something like that. But anger because you don't like what's going on, because a schedule needs to be kept and you don't like to move from what you're doing, or you don't like the food that's given to you or something like that. That kind of anger is disordered and it's inappropriate for the circumstances. What they would feel if they have the right attitude is that they would feel grateful for the time they got to spend at the park. So in other words, instead of feeling angry when it's time to go, they would feel grateful and thankful that they had that time. And the action they would take was they would want to thank the caregiver for taking them to the park. That would happen rather than them throwing a tantrum or a fit of anger because they don't get their way. So the emotion of anger in those circumstances is because they have the wrong attitude in the first place. And that is what needs to be adjusted. A child who has the right attitude will have the appropriate emotions for the circumstances. And I know what some parents are going to say. They're going to say, but wait a minute, my child's so little, they don't understand what the difference is between an appropriate emotion and an inappropriate emotion. Exactly. That's what we do as parents, is we teach them, and we teach them by the responses that we give to their actions and the emotions that they display. We talk to them and we teach them by our response. So when this little boy threw a fit, there was no coddling for this behavior. Coddling for an inappropriate emotion or action is not going to teach him the right lesson. It's going to actually teach him that that emotion and that behavior is acceptable. Instead, I took him by both arms and I looked him straight in the eye. I told him that his attitude was unacceptable, that anger was not appropriate for the circumstances, and that his behavior was not going to be allowed. Then I told him that he should be grateful that he got to go to the park. He was not used to being told this directly. So then he pouted for a minute and he tried to kick me. So I picked him up and I took him to the car. The other children were following and watching all of this happen, and I put him in the car seat. He started to fuss and cry and whine, so I applied CTM and quietly and calmly waited. When he was finished, we moved on. He also heard several of the other children in the car say thank you for taking us to the park. From then on, I had no problem with him whatsoever. He was happy the rest of the afternoon and everything was fine. I gave him some hugs later and showed him that I loved him. And then I had another short talk with him and let him know that anger is not okay when you don't get your way. What he learned from this episode is he needed to adjust his attitude, his emotions were not appropriate for the circumstances, and he would not be allowed to behave badly. The next time we went on an outing, there was no problem. And part of the thing that progressive parenting experts don't get is that this makes the child happier in the long run. The child who throws a fit and doesn't have a good attitude and regularly cannot regulate their emotions because they don't know they're supposed to is not going to be happy, and it makes for a very exhausted and frustrated parent. Now, some of you watching may wonder, what is CTM? That's the method that I was doing when he was in his car seat throwing a little fit. What it is it's a perfect way to teach children that throwing a fit is not acceptable without spanking them. You can click on the screen right now and see a step-by-step instructional video that explains it in detail. And don't forget to subscribe before you leave. Parents, if you're struggling, something needs to change and you can do this. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you here next week.